And also queer monuments, like if you go a place, like be aware of its history, bigger than just like, oh, here you can go to a party, which I think is sometimes a bit of a misconception that also like all queer people like to go to gay parties,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
that's not the case. So like I just really wanted also to show the great variety, because like we as a community, we're all super diverse, and that needed to be reflected. You also like if you want to go on a honeymoon, where would be a good destination where you can just book that honeymoon suite without like having to worry, if it will raise some eyebrows. Or, I mean, I have to say, like, of course, there's always a little bit of worry because the world, like, no country is free of homophobia and transphobia and the isms, but there's definitely places where it's safer to go.
Welcome to Deep Dive with me, Sean C. Fettig. According to the United Nations World Tour Organization, international tourism is expected to return to pre-pandemic levels this year. A recent survey of United States travelers by Nationwide Travel Insurance shows that 40% of 2023 travelers expect to travel more this year than they did in 2023, and 50% are planning to travel internationally. So where are people going? Europe was one of the strongest performers, receiving some of the most international arrivals in 2023. But Africa and the Middle East saw an even greater percentage, outperforming Europe. And these trends are expected to continue through 2024. For queer travelers, this is where it gets tricky. We want to travel to places that feel safe and welcoming, that don't threaten our freedoms or even our existence, but in practice, that can really limit us to very Western, very developed places, shrinking our travel worlds to similar cultures and experiences. And that kind of cloistered travel life denies us experiences with vibrant, welcoming communities in otherwise hostile, if only perceived, territory. Equaldex is a global index that aggregates queer-related indicators such as gender-affirming care, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, equal marriage, queer adoption, etc., into one measure of queer rights by country and region. According to Equaldex, some of the least welcoming and least safe places for queer people in the world are also some of the places seeing the greatest increase in travel: Africa and the Middle East, as well as Southeast Asia. So I wonder, is it safe to travel to these regions as a gay man? Is it safe if I hide my sexuality to the best of my ability? Or are large parts of the world just off the table for me? Today, I'm talking to Maartje Hensen. She created and maintains the wildly successful queer travel blog Once Upon a Journey. She's a photographer, and she's also the author of the queer travel book, The Pride Atlas. In our discussion, we touch on things like how queer travelers can balance a desire for authentic cultural immersion with the realities of safety, what it means to travel ethically and respectfully as a queer person without exoticizing or exploiting local queer communities, how we can recognize and check our own privilege that may come with some queer travelers like myself. Being a man and white and Western can go a long way towards security and safety when I travel in oppressive places, despite being gay. We discussed the legacy of colonialism and how that's contributed to some of the anti-queer sentiment and legislation in some places, as well as how we can disrupt some of these legacies of colonialism that continue to manifest in modern tourism. And of course, we talk about some of our favorite places and pleasant travel surprises. All right, if you like this episode, or any episode, please give it a like on your favorite podcast platform, and or subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. And as always, if you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, please feel free to email me at deepdivewithsean@gmail.com. Let's do a deep dive. Maartje, thanks for being here. How are you?
Thank you. Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you. I love traveling. I'm an avid traveler. And in fact, as you know, I just got back from a European trip. I was in your city, Amsterdam, actually. So I've been a follower of your work for a while. First, because it's just good, solid work. Your photography, your writing, blogging. I think it's good for anyone that appreciates that stuff, but specifically for travelers. And second, because it's queer themed and it's important to me, especially lately, as we've been experiencing growing violence against the queer community worldwide in the past few years, to know where I'm going and to make sure that it's a place that's safe for me and my family. So I'm excited to talk to you about some of this stuff today.
Yeah, well, thanks for the compliments.
Absolutely. You deserve it. You've built a queer travel blog, Once Upon a Journey, kind of from scratch. And it's grown into one of the largest LGBTQ plus travel and lifestyle blogs. So I'm really interested in people that build up, one, their own business, but two, specifically, pulling together from different interesting aspects of their lives and then building out something like a blog or like as you do, a blog that focuses on queer travel and a lifestyle, and you've also done photography. So I'm kind of just interested in getting a sense of what inspired you to do this? How did you build this? How did it happen? And how has that kind of evolved over time?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, like a crazy story because I don't think it was like a very active plan of me to do this. I don't think at the time that I started doing this, like, I don't know if I had many examples like of people doing this, but I've always had kind of like a drive for like writing and photography. And when I started traveling with my partner at the time in 2017, we went on a whole world trip. Like we sold all of our stuff. And my partner was a woman, and we did notice there wasn't a lot of resources for like queer couples online. We definitely saw a lot of gay men couples, but not a lot of couples that looked like us. And so on the way, I did kind of get a vibe like, okay, I want to share more of our experience. That because first I had this whole other idea, the name Once Upon a Journey was kind of based because I wanted to tell like fairy tales and folk tales of all the places I traveled to. I had this whole photography idea with like little like miniatures or like, you know how you can get like in gift shops, you can get kind of like tiny like little things. And I was kind of like, oh, and then I can make, a connection with like fairy tale. It was a whole like it was way too much to actually produce. So that never really happened. But then along the way, like we started sharing our own travel stories and like we were a bit more open about like us being a couple, which was a really scary thing to do. And I remember having a lot of argument with Rox about like wanting to post a kissing picture when we were in Japan. We were like, I think 3 or 4 months into our trip. And she was just like, no, like, we don't know what's gonna, like all the hate we're gonna get. Like, we were just very stuck in that fear. We were also like, being really like kind of going back in the closets. Oh, we're just gal pals, when we were traveling. But there was a part of me that felt like, I guess like visibility is good. Like representation helps by not being visible, like also not having any visible examples ourselves. There were a couple, like, I don't want to say like we're the first or anything. Like there were definitely a couple of trailblazers out there, but it wasn't so easy to find. And like Instagram was very different at the time. So yeah, we just started sharing more. And then like it kind of went hand in hand with like getting more questions from girl couples and like, they were just kind of like, oh my God, you're doing this. Like, I dream of doing this, but I don't even dare to set the first step. I don't even know where to begin. Like, how do you even go to like Asia? Do you dare to book a room? Do you dare to book a double bed? And these were all things like we were already doing these things. And it was kind of, it still is like wild to me that just by living and doing things that I want to do, like, there is obviously also people who want to do that, but like it's a step too far for them to realize it. So like by having some visibility, and like someone doing it and like sharing that, I guess that could be helpful for some people, which is still like crazy to me because I'm just like, well, I guess in the Netherlands we have a saying, be normal, that's crazy enough. So like being normal is very like, oh, we're all normal and everything is normal. So like I never thought like, oh, I just thought of myself as very normal. And then when we were doing it, I realized, oh, maybe this is not normal for everyone. So maybe this is an opportunity where, we get to share and like we possibly get to help some people. And I think that's awesome. And then, yeah, things just kind of flew up from there. I guess a lot of people like thought it was helpful, like sometimes inspiring even, which also, got to a whole point where I was kind of like overwhelmed by like, oh my God, now you see me as such an example, but I'm still like a normal person and I make mistakes. And, it was a little bit of a pressure, but it's also like, yeah, so that's kind of how it went. And I'm definitely someone who's kind of like, I had also heard of people like kind of making money with blogging and like I didn't understand how it worked, but like I'm definitely someone who's like, I don't know how it works, but I think I can do it. So let me just make it happen. So yeah, that's just kind of, yeah, we just went for it. And definitely a lot of people in our environment thought we were crazy for doing it, or they thought like, oh, that's cute. oh, you'll start a blog, oh, you'll write a few things. That's adorable. And here we are. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a handful of things in there that I kind of want to dig into a little bit.
Yeah.
Early on in the response, you mentioned when you were first thinking about doing this, it was easy to find content aimed at gay men. So you've built something that really centers queer women and lesbians and trans folks. And this is something that I have always taken for granted as a white gay man. I can point back into the 90s and yeah, sometimes you had to do a little digging, but if there's queer content, right? Like there's gay content. And it wasn't until recently, and this speaks to, what you said, that I, shame on me, realized when we say that it's relatively easy to find gay content, what I'm really talking about is finding content for gay men.
Yeah.
So now you've contributed to this universe. And I'm wondering if you feel like the landscape has changed and it's a bit more, when we talk about the queer community or the gay community, that it specifically includes women and trans folks in a way that it didn't.
Yeah, I definitely see a big shift happening. I'm very glad that because, it's lovely that we're like a rainbow community, but definitely also if you look at a lot of prides and stuff, there's definitely a lot of white gay men at the forefront of it, while there's also still a large group of, other marginalized communities within our community that aren't always, comfortable or put in the center of it. I do see a shift. I guess it is interesting because it's intersectionality, right? Like there's oppression like in different ways. And in a way, like gay liberation, like a white gay man, like in the whole hierarchy in the system, systematically, if being gay, if that's the oppression, like it's still kind of high up on the hierarchy, sadly, for the other like marginalized communities, And so I think there's still a lot of people. And then it's also logical because, that is like for gay men, it's also, especially if you're very flamboyant or, very, I don't know, like if you're perceived a certain way, you absolutely do need safe spaces. So like a lot of gay men safe spaces have also been created for that purpose, But I think, yeah, other communities and with different intersectionalities, it's not just, like especially queer women, they could also be in women's spaces, to feel safe. It doesn't necessarily have to be a queer women's space. Like it's getting very niche if you look at that, which also happens nowadays, which I think is really cool. And I think I say nowadays, but it has always happened because we know our community, we always have ways to find each other. It's just that not every part of the community has always been like that visible and still isn't, sadly.
Mm-hmm. Something else you mentioned is being visible as a tool to help other folks or to signal to other folks that the community exists and maybe to empower other folks. This is something that's on my mind. My husband and I, when we travel, there are times that we'll hold hands. And I think always in the back of my mind is balancing my own safety in that space against being visible as a tool to empower other folks, right?
Yeah.
And there are definitely times that I think, my own safety in this moment trumps any message that I could send.
Yeah.
But that is something that's always on my mind. And I'm wondering how you balance that.
Yeah, I think this is very tricky because, of course, personal safety is also very important, because also like you can't be visible if you're dead or, but I also very strongly believe that you can't be what you can't see. And I do feel a lot of our fears is also trauma. And like, we also kind of need to sometimes like test the waters and like see that, oh, maybe a place or it has maybe changed, but then again, like you also don't want to re-traumatize. So this is very, very tricky. I do have to say, like, as a female presenting couple for me and my now ex-partner, I do feel there was kind of a bit more of a safety net, like for girls holding hands. Depends where you are, because there's definitely a lot of cultures where men holding hands or like hugging, like is the norm. But like for men holding hands, that's often, especially in Western cultures, like differently perceived than if it's women or women presenting people. But yeah, it's a very, very tricky thing. And I definitely have to say, like, for us being visible, it doesn't always mean that like because I also want to be respectful for our culture, like if you're in
Mhm.
places like where PDA just isn't a thing, like I'm not gonna be like, oh, I need to be visible, because no, also like straight couples aren't doing that, so like it's not like gay agenda, like I definitely also, if we would take pictures, and like show affection, there will be at times where there would not be like other people around. So it was also like to create like online visibility and in places where it was appropriate enough to do it. Because yeah, especially in offline, like in the real world, like your own safety definitely matters a lot. And I think me coming from the Netherlands, which is like I feel relatively safe in my own country. So like when I'm traveling, I'm okay with being a bit more, I guess. I don't have all those traumas of people that do come from a place where it's like very not safe to do it. So I can definitely see how that would lead to more hesitancy.
Mhm.
And like obviously that's a huge, huge privilege that I have, which I also don't know if that makes me like dumb sometimes or like naive. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I do feel like I dare to push a little bit more than other people may want to.
Mhm.
I wanted to add that also, like in all the places that I travel, I do try to connect with the local queer community and like hear their perspective and like what they feel safe. Because like obviously I can have my ideas and like we can base, we can have an image of a country based on the laws and stuff, but like just like literally hearing it from people in the community, what's frowned upon, what you can get away with, because you may have ideas from coming from your own perspective, but the reality may be very different.
I'm actually glad you bring up this last point because something that I've noticed when I travel as a gay person, and something that had some locals not told me, I would never have considered. And I suppose this goes to, some of my white privilege, or I suppose maybe American privilege. I have had in a handful of countries, folks tell me as an American, I can get away with things in their country that locals can't.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's also something I wanted to say. That's another layer where like I've definitely heard that from like locals. They're like, oh, but you'll always be seen as a foreigner. And like I've had comments before like, oh, but in your country, we know in your country that's okay. Like in our country it isn't, but because it's in yours and like you're here now and you bring that with you, for you it's okay. Which is also like, of course, like incredibly sad. And also why I'm a big fan of like, getting in touch with the local community before you get raving about a country where it's like, oh, but actually the locals don't have like all those rights and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if it's your honeymoon, like don't worry about it. Like definitely depends on what kind of trip you're on. But I always think it's really, really awesome to meet. I mean, it feels like meeting family all over the world. Like that's, I think, the beauty of community.
Well, I guess that brings me to your book, The Pride Atlas, which highlights iconic destinations for queer travelers around the world. And so I love travel books to begin with, so that's my baseline. But I just really love this book for a handful of reasons. I'm not just stroking your ego. I think it's a great book.
Thank you.
It's really needed right now, which is actually why I got it. I'm becoming more and more cognizant of where I travel, not only for my safety, but also to be supportive of the queer community in places that I wouldn't otherwise think about. I am wondering, in putting this together, first of all, what triggered this idea? And then second, when you were thinking about the places that you wanted to highlight as being places that are healthy, safe, good for queer travelers, what are some of the criteria that you settled on in such a way that you felt comfortable highlighting some of these places?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that whole process, oh, it was a beast.
It feels
So
like it might have been, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So this idea, it's interesting because the Dutch publishing house reached out to me in 2020. Well, we all know we had a lot of time on our hands. And they were like, oh, people can write travel books, now that you have time. And so they were like, if you have an idea, let us know. So then it took me a year to realize what kind of book I wanted to write, which was, in hindsight, I was kind of like, that was hilarious because I was kind of like, what kind of travel book would I write? But like, I already had a queer travel blog, so obviously it was going to be a queer travel book. But somehow it took a year to like let it sink in and kind of had the idea. But then it hit me like, I got all the clarity. I had a whole complete book pitch, like including marketing ideas, and they were like, "Whoa, you really thought this through?" And I was like, "Yeah." But then they were like, oh, we have someone in the office that's like exactly your target audience. And I was like, oh, you have one gay in the office. And he has some questions. So like, I don't know if we want to move forward with this. And at this point, I'm like, I just see the vision and I'm just like, if someone's not 100% on board, I don't want I don't want to work with you because I feel this like at this point I'm like, so I have this drive. I see what needs to happen and what the world needs, and it needs to be collaborative, like I cannot be the only writer because it needs to be by and for the community, like I cannot speak on behalf of everyone because that's not how I move through the world, like, and no one ever can. And then something crazy happens, like I'm thinking, okay, I guess I'm not gonna write a book. But then a month later I get an email from a British publishing house and they're basically pitching my book to me. Like they're looking for a writer. And I'm like, what in the world is this? I didn't really believe in like spiritual things or like, universe, but this was kind of like, I cannot explain how this I mean, of course, there's a logical explanation. They had the idea too, and like they found my travel blog and like, but still like that it found its way to me and that I was kind of like, this is crazy because I have thought so much about this. I have all these ideas and they were luckily very open to all of it because I was a little, I want to say harsh on some things because they had some ideas and I was like, nope, we're definitely not going to do that. They wanted to do like a ranking system of like how LGBT friendly. I was like, we cannot, that's also like, if you look at colonization, like ranking and everything, has very much ties to like hierarchy and colonization. And like also for who do we rank it for? Because your experience as a gay white male traveler is very different than if you're a non-binary queer person of color, So I was like, that's definitely a no. But they were like so embracing it. I was like, oh my God, this is even better than I could have imagined. I could bring the people on board that I wanted to make this product with me. And then they also had input in the places. So it's really a collaborative effort because even though I've traveled a lot, like my knowledge is limited, and I do believe with more people, we have more knowledge, and it just results in a better product. So there was a kind of idea, like there was kind of like a global idea, like this many places, and we would kind of chop it into this many like regions. We did have to make the hard decision to like not include countries where it's like still very illegal to be queer, which I also feel very conflicted about because of course, yes, personal safety is very important, but I also want to mention that most anti-LGBT legislation is put in place through colonization. So like now the whole Western world being like, oh, it's terrible they have those laws. I'm like, we can also reflect a little back on our like ancestors and stuff who put those in place. So like, I also I don't really believe in boycotts in that sense. I definitely see it where a lot of change needs to be worked. And I love all the decolonization work that's been happening in queer communities around the world. But yeah, I did want to put that out there. And then it was just really important that it was more than just gay bars around the world because I just wanted to show like the whole variety and like that there's like not every place may be for everyone, that's impossible. But I wanted everyone to pick up the book to find a place in the book that's like, oh my God, this is something for me, Like I remember finding out that there's a weekly or something knitting club somewhere in Australia. And I'm like, what? Like it's a queer knitting club. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I was like, oh my God, that's like so cute. And like, queer bookstores and like other places that not everyone always thinks about. And also queer monuments, like if you go a place, like be aware of its history, bigger than just like, oh, here you can go to a party, which I think is sometimes a bit of a misconception that also like all queer people like to go to gay parties because that's not the case. So like I just really wanted also to show the great variety because like we as a community, we're all super diverse and that needed to be reflected. You also like if you want to go on a honeymoon, where would be a good destination where you can just book that honeymoon suite without like having to worry if it will raise some eyebrows. Or I mean, I have to say, like, of course, there's always a little bit of worry because the world, like no country is free of homophobia and transphobia and the isms. But there's definitely places where it's safer to go.
I guess I'm glad you bring up this point because it's going to flip a couple of my other questions related to ranking on their head.
Sorry.
No, that's good because I don't know why, although it's entirely obvious. Most ranking systems rank the safest places for queer folks in the Western world, predominantly white countries with colonial histories.
Yeah.
And the least safe places like in the Middle East and Africa and parts of Asia.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, it is absolutely true that we are living in a time when the reality is that some of these countries, for probably dominant society and in the queer community, that's white folks, gay white men predominantly, it is true that these countries, some of these countries are just safer for the most part than are some countries in the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Asia. This is definitely something that I consider when traveling, but I do wonder, considering all of that, what's the pitch for visiting places like the Middle East or Africa? I'll just say out of hand, I would not go to Uganda today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do also want to say, because sometimes when I say like, I don't prefer, like, it's not like I cannot make anyone else do anything, like everyone has the right to make up their own mind, and, their own decision based on, safety. Because also like how I move through the world, it's very different from someone else. And like, I cannot decide for someone like, oh, you should definitely go travel to this place where, oh, you will most likely feel unsafe. Like, no, of course not. Like, definitely do what feels good to you. But for me, I like to lead with the curiosity. And I know also because of a lot of my privileges, I can move through places relatively safe, like as we mentioned before. I do also want to say again, like there's no place in the world that doesn't have a queer community. And if it's not very visible, like there's definitely an underground one. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's very good to realize that also if people do go out and you get to meet them, there's also, you can also generate change, or if you get to find out, like, because I know a lot of people want to boycott countries because they don't want to support like the government financially. I have to say, like, especially in the beginning of my travels, I did a lot of couch surfing, a lot of hitchhiking. So like I was not spending a lot of money towards any government. Also, I think there's always ways to find queer-owned businesses. And I love putting my money towards queer-owned businesses, So I think there's also a lot of good that you can do if you're being mindful about it. And if you want to do that, but obviously you don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, I do think like some ranking or like, websites like Equal Dex, like reflects the legislation of a country and also take in account like more of the public opinion. I do think it is helpful, to base, like to see what you would feel comfortable with. But yeah, also keep in mind that some of those things, like they're for very specific groups of people and they not,
And I think it's also worth questioning what it is that makes you feel safe or why you feel safe.
Exactly. And I think it's also good to like reach out to other travelers who are similar to you, who have been to those places, and to kind of, hear their experience. Because again, that's also, the whole visibility thing where also you can help people with your experience in those places. And it doesn't mean that you're going to have the same experience because, even people who look alike or, even if you just go at a different time, will have a very different experience. But, hearing other people's experience will also help you make a better judgment. Would this be a place where I would want to go to? Because I also have to mention the world is a very scary place. There's very scary people and there's scary legislation. But I do have to say, every time I travel, there's also so many kind and warm and loving people. I think there's a lot of places, especially with anti-LGBT legislation, they have an idea of a group of people that they don't know. And I think usually when you get to know people and you see them for people, a lot of the bias also hopefully goes away if they're like good and kind people in their heart. So in that sense, I think sometimes I believe you can change a little bit just by meeting different people. And, and it goes both ways because we may also have like some prejudice towards like people from a certain place, but like probably because we don't know anyone from there. So I just believe in building bridges. I don't know if that's clear, but.
Well, so in the Pride Atlas, you actually do kind of carve up the world and have suggestions of, places to travel and things to do. And so this conversation is making me wonder, it's probably pretty easy, if not even overwhelming in the Western world to identify places to travel and things to do there, right?
Yeah. I've also already gotten like a point of feedback that like, especially in the US, it's very coast centered, but it was indeed very overwhelming. And like, I don't even like choosing, but that And that was a very valid point. Like there was definitely, we could have included more in the Midwest or like, in the center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me wonder, what's the criteria? How did you think about things to do in places that the Western world might feel are more oppressive or uncomfortable? So I'm thinking like the Middle East, certain places in Africa, certain parts of Asia. How did you approach identifying things to do for queer folks or places to visit for queer folks in those parts of the world?
Yeah, so we did let legislation definitely did get involved because we did want to, there's definitely reality in this book, but like this, I also wanted to show people, how beautiful the world can be. So it's definitely, so we have made the hard decision to leave a lot of places out because we don't want to make a recommendation where there's like law-wise definitely a big risk of, punishments. And in other places, I've either visited or like some of my other contributors have like visited or even lived in those places, connected with local queer people. There's definitely a lot of things you can already find if you deep dive into the internet. Yeah, it's interesting. I think like when you're queer and you want to look for places at some point, we just have a way of going very deep into like down a rabbit hole or something, like sometimes even on Google Maps or like using Instagram hashtags. I feel like I don't know if I'm the only, but I feel like a lot of us are very resourceful in the community of finding very niche things or, Facebook groups, where you can see recommendations or like meetups or yeah, there's a lot of ways to find it, but I definitely see that not for everyone it's, that easy or they even know what kind of terms to look for. So that's also why I wanted to kind of bundle it in a book. And obviously it's not a complete thing, but it's a start.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've noticed that I'll consider, because you mentioned legislation that maybe outlaws behavior, but doesn't outlaw existence.
Yeah.
If that makes sense to you. So I can get away with not holding my husband's hand for 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know that I'm going to consider visiting a place where if I step off the plane, they're like, you're gay, you're going to jail,
Yeah, no, exactly. Or where it's like they won't let you like share a room or something or yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I think that's also the tricky thing with legislation. It's not always enforced. But I do think, it is, especially for a resource like this book, even though I would consider going to places where it's forbidden to be queer or gay, because also that's like often laws are for gay men and it's not always the case for queer women. And it really depends for trans folks, which is also like a whole different category. But I do think it's such a tricky topic. I don't know if there's like an answer or, or if there's even a right or wrong. Like it's so nuanced.
Yeah, and nuanced in so many facets, right? The location, the year, the time of year, the type of traveler, etc.
Oh my God. Yeah, it just goes on and on. Yeah.
Because traveling as a gay person doesn't really register as, I don't register as being gay if I'm traveling alone. So that's a very different travel
but then
experience.
for some, but I guess for some people, like it also depends how you present,
Right.
How is your gender expression? Like, some people may get away because they don't look gay or whatever, as if that's a thing. But like, I guess there are some kind of criteria. In some countries, there have been lists published, like how to recognize a gay. And, there will be gays and probably also straights, who fit into the category. Yeah, that could really put you in danger, of course. And like, it depends on what your purpose of your travel is. But of course, if you're going on your honeymoon, you don't want to like try to blend in or, deny a part of yourself just so you can go there.
Are there any places that come to mind that you were, relative to your personal travel, that you were reticent or suspicious about and were pleasantly surprised at the experience that you had?
Yeah, I think I went to Taiwan in, 2018. And at that time, I had not heard so much about Taiwan. And it's just probably also like just the circles that I was in or something. But like, especially like LGBT wise, I had no idea like what it would be like. So, but I went there because I wanted to see like a lantern festival. And then as soon as I got there already in Taipei, the capital, I saw like queer couples holding hands, even showing PDA, which was already like, whoa, like that is not so common in a lot of parts of Asia. like just to see straight people do that. So like seeing queer people do that, I was just kind of like, what is this place? And then like shortly after my visit, or like, 1 year or something after my visit, like Taiwan was the first country to legalize equalitarian marriage, which was kind of like, oh my God, like it's like that was just so cool to having no idea and kind of being like, oh, we'll see. Then to being super surprised, like, holy shit, this is awesome.
I had the same experience. In retrospect, I guess I was just naive. But when I first started traveling Latin America, and so I'm thinking of like Mexico, Panama, and Colombia, for some reason, I expected it not necessarily to be oppressive, but just not visible. And I was amazed at the number of queer couples I saw holding hands, the amount of men I saw with their nails painted.
Yeah.
Way more so than I ever see in Seattle.
Yeah.
And it just really struck me. And the amount of PDA that I saw between queer couples in Latin America.
I think in general, yeah.
Yeah, it was coming from the United States. It just reinforced for me this idea of like how embedded in us American exceptionalism is, that we're one of the greatest countries. We're one of the most progressive countries. And traveling to Latin America, I was really surprised at how much more progressive on this issue they felt just in daily life than I felt in the United States.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing about travel too, like how much you're checking your own like biases and, like also just cultural things, and also things that, yeah, for example, when I traveled to Russia with Rox, like we saw a lot of girls holding hands, and that was just so much more of a culturally accepted thing. And that we were like, oh, I guess we can do that because I guess that's okay for like, friends. But there's just so many things that we learn, this is connected to a certain sexuality or to a certain gender, but they may be totally, completely different in other countries. And yeah, especially like, showing affection, that's varies so much like throughout the whole world, like also for straight couples, if that's common or not. And I think that's really awesome. I also remember being in Mexico in Guadalajara, which I joked, like, oh, it's gay Guadalajara. Because I also remember so many parks where like a lot of couples, like all sorts of couples, like were just making out, and also queer couples. And I was like, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it felt really free. And I was also a little like, oh, I don't feel like it's that common in the Netherlands for just people to make out on the streets. So that was also another thing. I was like, I don't know if I need to see that like from other people necessarily, but like it's kind of cool. That, yeah,
I was like, tone it down a bit.
Yeah, I'm like, well, queer people, yes, but like straights, wait, not so much in my face, please.
Yeah, please. Yeah, a little less.
Yeah.
A little less.
Yeah.
And then once you see it, then you start seeing it everywhere.
Yeah.
Hey, where did you go in Russia? So my husband is actually Russian.
Oh.
And was lucky enough to go just before the shit hit the fan. So when did we go? 2016. We went to Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Yeah, I went in 2017. That's actually where I started the whole world trip, to the great fear of my parents. But I was like, I guess anywhere from there, they'll feel comfortable that I'm traveling. But we did the Trans-Mongolia Railway. So from Moscow, a bunch of stops, like we saw Lake Baikal, and then went into Mongolia and then into China. Yeah, that was a whole thing, but like pretty cool experience. I mean, obviously, like now at this time, would not recommend going.
I know. I'm glad I went when I did. I want to talk a little bit about the United States and get your perspective, because you don't live in the United States. And I'm always interested in the dynamic between people that are living in a place and the way that they're experiencing something, and then how that's kind of playing to outsiders. And we've been talking about how we as outsiders ingest information about countries that we then travel to, and sometimes we're right and sometimes we're wrong, right?
Yeah.
I'm interested in getting your perspective, given how embedded you are in travel and travel writing and photography. To those of us living in the United States, we're constantly being bombarded in the last few years with a huge rise in anti-queer, specifically anti-trans legislation, primarily in southern states, but it's not limited to that.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the states, you mentioned coastal states, which are typically more progressive, but the United States figures pretty heavily in the Pride Atlas.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you would consider the states a little different if you were piecing this book together today, or how you kind of see the States as an outsider when it comes to queer travel.
Yeah, I think it's very complicated because I do feel like there's a shift globally going on. Like I also see it in the Netherlands where we are the first country, to legalize equalitarian marriage, and now we're definitely moving backward, it feels like. Or I just feel like we felt like we're there, we did it. And then we just stopped having the talks. Yeah, I hope it's just like kind of an ups and downs situation that we just need to go through and then but yeah, I am pretty scared about like the polarization that happens, especially between left and right, and that things like human rights are just up for discussion again.
Mm-hmm.
Also thinking about like abortion, like, wait, that's what we can go back on that. That's just not how it should be. Yeah. And also LGBT rights, the fight is not over. And I don't know if in my lifetime I get to see it to be resolved or anything and what that would even look like. But I do feel I am a very optimistic person, like, sometimes a little toxic and positive, but like, I do believe change can happen and it will happen. I do believe that even though it's hard, because like, I feel like this is definitely, like it feels like a right and wrong, right? Like it's human rights, people should have rights and that should not be a discussion. But there's still, I feel like there's a need to build bridges to even see, like to have discussions and not just say like, we're right on this. And like, I don't know what that would look like, but I do feel like if we just understand each other better and see, because there's a lot of hurt, a lot of trauma that gets in the way, which also makes us, behave in certain ways that aren't always the most effective. And I don't even know how to get there. And it's so complicated, but somehow I do believe. I do also see a whole generation that's doing a lot of inner work and learning to do better. So I do believe that there's hope and there's a way where we get to, I don't know, we don't even need to be on the same page, but where we can really respect one another and live alongside each other. Because I guess that's just the whole misconception, and that comes again from the whole hierarchy and colonization, as if one person has something, it means someone cannot have it. Like it's the whole scarcity thing. But I do believe we all deserve human rights, and it doesn't take away from someone else's rights. Mm-hmm. But how we get there.
So when I was starting Deep Dive, I was thinking like, what to some degree, a vanity project. I'm at a point in my life where I can do this and just kind of pursue things that I'm interested in and have interesting conversations with people on topics that are interesting to me, right? And then last year I made a concerted effort, given what's happening globally, but particularly in the United States, when it comes to anti-queer legislation and rhetoric and increase in violence against the queer community. I made a concerted effort to lean into more queer-related content on Deep Dive, and stopped thinking about Deep Dive as being something that is just an interesting project and started thinking that perhaps it could have some type of meaning or be a resource in some way. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I wonder, given the work that you do with your photography, your writing, if this has in any way changed the way you approach the work that you do or the way that you conceptualize why you do it or how you do it.
Oh, absolutely. I have to say, like, before I started traveling, like, I wasn't even that connected to my queerness, which is kind of like in hindsight. I had known people who were kind of like, even before saying their name, they would say, I'm queer, and I was like, how is that big of your identity? But now I get it, like, because of travel, because meeting other people, like, because realizing how freaking privileged I am and was and have been. And then also learning, that I want more people to have rights and the opportunity to be themselves. And like, it just has added on, like also with my photography, I do photo shoots and weddings, mostly for queer people. Like, cause I was like really on a larger scale, but I'm also realizing like more and more how also important it is to do it on like a small scale, like that it's really about the people and just like the small thing of, well, I mean, it's a big thing. Like if people have a wedding, that's a big thing, but like just being a queer photographer and knowing that I have the understanding like what it's like to be part of a queer couple, for them to not having to worry or be afraid, like, oh, maybe there will be an inappropriate comment or kind of like, oh, who's the man or woman in the relationship, can you do a lift or whatever, like knowing that on that very small scale, like there's a way to create a safe space to let people fully be themselves. That's the most beautiful thing. And I think, yeah, I just feel like everyone deserves to be completely themselves. And I do believe that there is places where people can, there's fertile soil and there's, places where it's less easy to be yourself. But so that's also still why, with queer travel, I feel like if I get to find the places where people get to, have a better experience, like I want them to know about it because I feel they deserve it. Like I truly think travel is for everyone of all this intersectionalities, like regardless of your budget. I do believe it is for everyone. And like, I just really want people to see like what beauty there can be.
Well, so on that note, what are some of your favorite places to travel or some of the favorite places you've been?
Yeah. So you mentioned also like Mexico. Mexico is a place where I would always go back to. It's also a huge place, so there's also a lot you can explore and see. I also always enjoy going to Thailand, but I do have to say, like, legislation wise, Thailand is definitely popular amongst queer travelers. I know for the local queer community, it is harder, especially for like trans people. It's definitely the law is not yet on their side. I do believe Thailand just made progress with, I don't think they legalized equal marriage yet, but they are on the way. They did pass something that would make that happen, which would make it, I think, the second country in Asia and only the first in Southeast Asia. So I do believe that's progress and some nice kind of lights in times of darkness. So I would say, yeah, those are definitely the two like on top of mind that, I would always return to.
I don't want to besmirch any places, but like, is there any place where you had high hopes and you were kind of like, I'm glad I went, but wouldn't go back?
I think sometimes I think my expectations were a little too high or just different. I do remember going to San Francisco and just being like, knowing all of the history and, the gay district and like, this is going to be it. And it just didn't completely feel like it for me. I think I was just like way too high hopes. And like, then it was just the reality of it was just, yeah, a lot of gay men and like commercialized. And yeah, I was just not completely what I had hoped, I guess, to find. Yeah.
You know what I think? And maybe someday we'll crack this code when it comes to travel is I think that the moment in time is what makes that place feel the way it maybe does. And if you're not there in that moment, some places just can't capture it and maintain it.
Yeah.
And I think San Francisco is the same for me. It was so pivotal and it had such a vibrant queer community at a critical time in the United States that I was hoping to kind of immerse myself in that in San Francisco and feel that. And I just didn't.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's also along the lines of, gentrification and everything and, all the gay neighborhoods and like, and then even the queer community being pushed out again because, it gets too expensive. It's just, it's so tricky. And it is very true, it is very pivotal moments in time. But yeah, that's always changing. And that's also kind of cool, that things are ever changing. But yeah.
Okay, final question. You ready for it?
Yeah.
What's something interesting you've been reading, watching, listening to, or doing lately? It doesn't have to be related to this topic, but it can be.
Well, I've definitely been tapping into like a lot of, healing. I went through a breakup last year and like I feel like I'm getting a bit more woo-woo, but I'm definitely in my Saturn return and just life just feels very upside down. And I've just been very confronted with a lot of like paradigm shifts, I guess. And I guess as part of that, I've recently been very interested in like learning more about like psychedelics. I've been watching a lot of Netflix shows about the psilocybin. I'm still in. Yeah, so I think that's just been something. Yeah, I guess like I got diagnosed with ADHD 2 years ago, and like ever since I've been very aware of like where my hyper focus is. So like right now, that's kind of my hyper focus, and that's kind of like a lot of things that I'm learning about and like I guess like just learning a lot more about myself, but also like how much we can change our minds. It's also related to like mindfulness and so I guess it's kind of different, although I mean there's also definitely a lot of like mind expanding trips you could make, for example, to like South America to do ayahuasca or something.
Yeah, like Peru.
So exactly. So who knows? Maybe that's next on the blog.
But you're in a good place for that though, right? Like, don't you have legalized?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I never really done it. Like because I guess also because here, like weed and mushrooms, like I guess now it's technically truffles because I think mushrooms are like illegal. But yeah, it's just so common. But I've also been always very scared of like the hallucinatory things. I'm like, I already have a rich imagination. And I was scared of it.
Yeah,
It enhances my mood. I'm like, I'm gonna freak out. I'm gonna go bad. But I guess now I'm really in a place where I'm kind of like, I'm very open and welcoming different experiences. And I also learned about microdosing and how that's a good way, like as an alternative for like antidepressants or like ADHD medication. I was like, I kind of went off my ADHD meds because I was like, I don't need them anymore. But then sometimes I'm like, I don't know. So yeah, that's been an interesting journey. And like, yeah, it's very easy to access here. So I'm in a great place for that.
And I think it's a new frontier. I think even medicine, like the medical field, is starting to really kind of invest in the impact that this has and how this can be used.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and there's definitely also a lot of more like there's a lot more places where it's also getting like legalized again because it used to be legal also in the States. Yeah, but also like as forms of therapy, where it's a guided experience, with I think that's just really a beautiful thing and like very fascinating, very interesting to learn about.
Yeah, our friends were like that live there. They were like, well, we could do that, but I was also like, I don't know what's going to happen to me when I do it. No. I don't want to ruin a friendship or something.
Oh my god, yeah, you never know what's going to come up. Yeah,
like the next day, I'm like, I'm so sorry, I ruined your house.
Yeah, no, but I don't know. Who knows? Maybe at a time in the future where you feel like ready for it. Because I do feel like I'm glad I didn't do it sooner, but like when I did when I felt ready for it. Yeah.
Maartje, thanks for being here. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you keep doing this because I keep coming back to your work and I love it.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. This was really awesome.
The global queer travel scene is a complex and ever-evolving landscape. From the vibrant pride celebrations in major cities like Sydney and New York and Berlin, to the hidden gems of queer culture in unexpected places like Guadalajara, Mexico, and Thailand, there are countless opportunities for queer travelers to explore, connect, and find a sense of belonging around the world. When I travel as a queer person, safety is always a top priority and consideration for me. And from that perspective, it's important to research local laws and attitudes and take precautions around visibility and public displays of affection. We need to prioritize our well-being and have contingency plans in place. Connecting with other queer travelers, whether through online communities or in-person meetups, can provide invaluable support and resources and safety nets for us. However, it's also crucial to approach queer travel with mindfulness and respect and a commitment to ethical engagement with local communities. As Maartje emphasized throughout our conversation, the legacies of colonialism and ongoing disparities in power and privilege shape the experiences of queer people in different parts of the world. Queer travelers, especially those of us with relative privilege, have a responsibility to educate ourselves about the cultural, legal, and social context of the places we visit. This means doing thorough research, connecting with local queer organizations and activists, and being open to learning from the lived experiences of queer people on the ground. It also means being conscious of how our actions as travelers can impact local communities, and striving to support queer-owned businesses, respect local customs and norms, and amplify the voices and work of local queer activists. Ultimately, queer travel has the potential to be a profound source of joy and growth and solidarity. And by approaching it with intentionality, humility, and a commitment to uplifting local queer communities, we can help build a world where queer people can cross borders and engage cultures as ambassadors, freely, authentically, and without fear. All right, check back soon for another episode of Deep Dive. Chat soon, folks.